Hello and welcome to Sticky from the Inside, the employee engagement podcast that looks at how to build stickier, competition-smashing, consistently successful organisations from the inside out. I'm your host, Andy Gorham, and I'm on a mission to help more businesses turn the lights on behind the eyes of their employees, light the fires within them, and create tons more success for everyone. This podcast is for all those who believe that's something worth going after and would like a little help and guidance in achieving that. Each episode, we dive into the topics that can help create what I call stickier businesses. The sort of businesses where people thrive and love to work, and where more customers stay with you and recommend you to others because they love what you do and why you do it. So, if you want to take the tricky out of being sticky, listen on. Okay then, what if the reason someone struggled at work for years wasn't down to poor application, effort, or attitude, but because they've been navigating the world with an undiagnosed neurodivergent brain? For many adults, discovering they're autistic, have ADHD, dyslexia, or another form of neurodivergence later in life can be a double-edged sword. It can bring understanding and relief, but it can also unlock a flood of questions and a whole bunch of self-doubt. Like, how did I not see this before? How much easier could things have been if I'd known about this? And was I ever actually difficult, or have I always been just different? This isn't a medical diagnosis in the traditional sense. It's a reframing of how someone's brain works, and importantly, always has. And when that realization comes late, it can shake the foundations of a person's self-worth, their work identity, and their career story, or it can be the unlocking of their latent superpowers. But I think it also reveals a deeper issue. Our workplaces are still built around assumptions of normal. And for neurodivergent individuals, especially those who spent years masking to survive at work, those environments can do some real harm. And in today's episode, I'm joined by the fabulous Chris Hood from Neurobridge. And I know Chris is a passionate advocate for neuro-inclusion, and I'm hoping he's going to help us unpack what this kind of late diagnosis really feels like and how we can properly support people going through these things. I genuinely think this one's going to be quite a powerful listen, so do stick with us. Chris, welcome to the show, my friend.
Lovely to see you again, Andy.
Yeah, great to see you too, my friend. Loved having a chat with you I think it was Engage for Success Radio some time ago.
Yeah, good few months now.
Yeah, I thought this is something I need to dig into a bit more. I've got two kids with neurodivergence. I got nieces and nephews with neurodivergence. I'm absolutely positive I got something going on with me that was never diagnosed, but this, whatever. This is a fascinating topic, I think, especially for today's workplace. But before we start gambling on and getting into all of that, bud, tell me a little bit about you and what you do over at Neurobridge.
So I'm Chris Hood. I am head of coaching and community over at Neurobridge. So I'm leading the coaching team, and I take the lead with a lot of the projects that we've got going on within our online platform, The Bridge. So I've helped create a large number of the courses that we've got available, helped to design and publish a lot of the guides and resources. And yeah, I'm really there to help deliver a powerful experience for all of our users, whether they're neurodivergent, a team member, or neurotypical and a manager. It's about helping everyone kind of get on the same page, because it's a really normal part of who we are, always has been. We just didn't know before, but we're getting there now. So yeah, it's a really, really exciting area to be working in.
And specifically at Neurobridge, what are you trying to do, my friend? What's the work all about?
In the simplest terms, we're trying to help people like us who are still without the support that they need. In broader, more corporate terms, I suppose you'd say we're redesigning the modern professional landscape so that all types of minds are fully embraced, fully supported, fully included. People don't need to hide such large parts of themselves, and we can actually all benefit from the beauty that diversity of thought actually brings, as opposed to just seeing it for the challenges. We want to help people understand that this is a real opportunity that we can start to harness.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I'm sure will come out in today's conversation. And I mentioned in the intro that you're a very passionate advocate for this. Where's all
Mm.
that stem from, mate? Where's that drive, that real energy come from for this topic?
I've always known that I wanted to do something that revolved around helping people. And originally, I really didn't get on well with school, but felt like I had to keep pushing to try and get the good grades. So I went down the route of A-levels in biology and sports science. And then I realized I didn't want to be a PE teacher. So what else can I do? And I went into physiotherapy. And yes, working in healthcare was incredibly difficult. And in retrospect, I now know that that was because I had undiagnosed ADHD at the time. But I received my ADHD diagnosis in 2022. Started medication later in that year, and I'd been posting about that journey online and saw the reception that got and the way people were benefiting from it. And we'll be talking a lot about guilt, grief, shame, all of those
Yeah,
very tricky topics today, and it was realizing how much of that could be avoided for other people. I've always said I just want to leave the world in a bit of a better place than I found it, and if this is one area that I can do that in, then that's good for me.
I love that. Nice stuff. I know when we talked about before, off air,
Mm,
you were talking about the medical support, and when you finally got onto medication
mm.
to help with the ADHD, I think you said something like the fog had kind of been lifted. Do you just explain to the listeners what that transition has been like for you? What it felt like before with your ADHD, and as
Mm,
a result of the correct medication,
mhm.
what that feels like and what that's done for you?
Like finding out that you've needed glasses your whole life, and then suddenly you put them on, and it's a bittersweet moment because I can finally sift through my thoughts a little bit easier. But then there does come, is this how easy things feel for everyone else? It
Mm,
got rid of all of this mental tug of war that I was always at with myself of, I just want to go and have a shower. Why is that such a difficult thing in my mind? And why is my body feeling frozen because of it? And then all of a sudden you've got this increased fuel reserve and you realize that, I can actually choose what I want to go do and I can go and do it. And yeah, it's a very strange transition to realize that the way your brain works isn't what everyone else is experiencing. The radio chatter with a playlist and a movie that's running through your favorite scenes every time. And it's a difficult thing to comprehend that other people don't have that level of internal distraction going on
yeah.
constantly, and there's not that much effort associated with doing something with it.
This is what is fascinating, my friend, because it goes the other way too. Somebody who doesn't suffer from that has absolutely no idea what's
Mm,
going through your head and why seemingly the simplest request to get you to focus on something or do
mm,
something is full of anxiety and turmoil.
mm,
So it definitely cuts both ways, which is why I really think this conversation is an important conversation because
mm,
um, as well as you can go through life maybe feeling that something's not right but not knowing,
mm,
and you've talked about your diagnosis, the other people can go through life thinking, well, the wrong things about why this person is perhaps different, but don't
mm.
even know if they recognize it as being different, just difficult and really hard to work with, or work shy, or, all those kind of things, the assumptions that we make because we don't understand.
Yeah. I think that's something that we do see a lot of in the work that we do is people just don't have the level of understanding or awareness that this isn't a choice that this person struggles with that. And it's not a choice that they communicate in that way. Like
Mm.
it's a variation of the human mind and the human brain. And that isn't something that they have much of a locus of control over.
Yeah.
There's aspects that absolutely we can improve on things, but there's certain parts of the way that we operate that are hardwired genetically. You know,
Yeah.
this isn't something that we've picked up. It's not a result of poor parenting, a lack of discipline, screen time, like everyone tries to say. It's part of who we are. And the difficulty arises through that lack of understanding. And I think the ignorance associated with that as well, but we didn't know, and I think that's a difficult thing because people can rightfully be angry after they're diagnosed because why didn't I get the help that I needed? But, you go back even just 15 years ago, we knew so much less than we do now.
Yeah.
So everyone was in a state where they just didn't understand. And we have been pushed towards a more singular way of thinking, communicating, working, socializing, and we've started to treat that as the peak or the norm, the thing we should all strive for. But we're starting to transition away now, where people are realizing that, like you were saying, different doesn't necessarily mean difficult. And I think that's when you've got that understanding and you know how to meet someone where they are.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I'm also, I guess, cheered to hear that somebody who's working right in the middle of it is
Mm.
using words like "we're getting there,"
Yeah.
and that people are beginning to sort of wake up to some of this stuff because it seems to me, certainly in some of the forums that I end up working or rooms that I end up sort of facilitating,
Mm.
there is definitely a greater awareness,
Mm.
particularly with individuals coming up to me at the start of a session and sort of saying,
Yeah.
by the way, Andy, just so you know, I've got ADHD. And if I'm sitting there twiddling with something or fidgeting or blah, it's not that I'm not engaged. It's just what happens.
Yeah.
And I'm always really kind of torn at that point. I'm torn that the person feels that they have to come and say that to me
Mm.
because, someone's sort of saying, by the way, Andy, I'm not engaged today. I'm just sitting here staring out the window because I couldn't be asked. I mean, no one's going to
Yeah.
say that to me,
Mm.
to me. So I just sort of
You're
feel
not nuts.
slightly conflicted that someone, bless them, has to come and sort of say it. But it's also great for me because it just gives me a signal
Yeah.
that, okay, I've got to deal with this person in a slightly different way. So it's useful, but I there's a tinge of regret that someone needs to sort of say that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know where you're coming from. It's almost as if I wish they didn't feel the need to say it.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think
Absolutely.
that is born from, in some ways, negative past experiences where they were made to feel wrong for being
Yeah.
different and wrong for having different needs, like needing to fidget with something, which I'm doing right now. And this is where that shame starts to develop in people. And it's almost like they're prefacing their existence when they're in social settings. And it's like, I'm just giving you a heads up, I'm different. And some of that comes from shame. But again, as I say, things are changing. I think some of it is actually, I don't know if I'd say pride necessarily, but I think it's the loosening of those shameful shackles that people have been wearing, where they're feeling a little bit more at ease saying this is the case, and they're
Yeah.
not saying I'm sorry, I'm going to be fidgeting. They're just saying, just so you're aware.
Just so
I
you
think
know.
it's a nuanced area. There's going to be a whole host of stuff that contributes to someone doing that, but
Absolutely. And I guess the symptoms or the manifestations of all of this neurodivergence are multitude because, people who are autistic do not all behave in the same way. They do not have all the same emotional responses. I know that from my nieces.
yeah,
They're twins and they are very different in how it affects them. I, I, I want to pick up on a couple of things that you've already started to talk because I'd love to understand that kind of emotional journey when you get your diagnosis, because you have used already some powerful words like shame and grief and regret. These aren't sort of fly by night words. These are deeply emotional words. So are you able to kind of like share what you think that emotional journey is like from somebody who has, comparatively speaking, had a late diagnosis, right, of neurodivergence? Can you do that for us, mate?
yeah. It's a very strange one, but there was things I wasn't expecting that came up. So immediately after my diagnosis, thanks very much, doctor. See you next week. Hang up. Floods of tears, but they were truly tears of relief
Mm.
and validation. And I've finally got this objective answer for why I've been struggling. And it's like a weight did feel lifted almost immediately that, so I wasn't wrong when I felt different. I wasn't wrong when I felt like I needed more help. Like this has always been true.
Mm.
What I wasn't expecting was how short-lived that feeling was.
Oh,
It was
wow.
probably no more than a week, I'd say. And then as you sit with it, you start to digest it more. You then start reflecting, and it was the grief that I really wasn't prepared for,
Yeah.
because it's strange to grieve something that never was. You know, you're looking back on your life and you're grieving the opportunities that you may have missed out on, the friendships that fell apart, the relationships that were strained, the difficulties at home that you might have had, and you're grieving the fact that those things didn't have to happen, but they did.
That's so interesting, mate, because again, from the outside, you would think, well, that's it. Brilliant. You now
Mm-hmm.
got the answers. Everything can kind of move forward from there. You should be in your happy place, right? It's so fascinating, not surprising that you then get this flood of, oh my God, how much have I missed out on? Or where have I had real trouble where I perhaps didn't need to have had trouble? And that's just another hidden part of this, right?
The diagnosis, it really is the tip of the iceberg. Like
Yeah.
that wasn't the end of this journey for me. That was realizing that there was a jigsaw puzzle ahead of me. You know, like I'd had all these pieces mismatched, and then I finally had one corner finished, and it's like, okay, we can actually start putting this thing together now. But
Mm.
it's the years following, and I say years. It can take a very long time for people to get to a place where they aren't really carrying that emotional burden, that grief. I don't know if it's something that would ever go away completely, especially if you were diagnosed much later than I was. Like as you said, it was relatively late for me, but still far younger than the average female in terms
Yeah.
of actually receiving a diagnosis. So
Yeah.
the longer you go, there's more and more memories and experiences and emotions and pain that have been compounding over that time. And there's so much for people to unpack. And it's a very strange place to find yourself in, because you start to wonder who you are. You know,
Yeah.
you realize that you've built up this mask over the years, and all these things that you've been overcompensating for and hiding from people just to try keep up appearances of being a functioning human, a good student, a good child, trying to do your best. You're essentially living for everyone else. And then you start to realize, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I like. I don't know what I want from life, because I've been at the whim of that shame and that guilt that I've been feeling my whole life. That's the thing that's really been driving me along, is just trying to keep that out of my field of vision. But it's there now. And as you peel all these layers back, it's who's underneath all of it. And that is a very difficult place to find yourself in, but it is a really powerful opportunity for people to discover who they were before the world started telling them who they should be and how they should live, and what they should be doing with their life. They can really start to reinvent themselves in that sense and come back to who they were before all of that. And that is a really beautiful thing to go through as well. And I'm fortunate enough to have had sufficient support to actually get to that place. You know, a lot of
Yeah.
people, they really are going at it on their own, and it isn't smooth sailing, you know.
I'm sure. And I want to dig into this masking thing a little bit later on, because
Mm,
I think that's a really fascinating piece. But I also want to pick up on something I've just nodded and said, oh yeah. And you mentioned the sort of average diagnosis time of a female.
mm.
So are you saying that later in life, it's the females who are getting diagnosed later? It's caught much later than in males. And
Mm.
why is that?
So this is primarily in reference to things like ADHD and autism.
Uh,
They still are only just really getting to grips with just how varied it presents in people, and how different it can look, and how it isn't that stereotype that we've been shown over the years. And
yeah.
the majority of research that was done some years back, it was done on young white boys. So that's why the image that we've got of ADHD is this really hyperactive class clown type. It isn't the perfectionist that tends to daydream quite a lot and struggles getting started with things. It isn't the person that seemingly loses place in conversations all the time because they're supposed to be like this. So over the course of the last sort of 30, 40 years, we've seen so many people that were missed because they didn't fit the stereotypical mold of what that condition looks like. So for women, I think the average age of an ADHD diagnosis is 34, 35 years old.
Really?
But I've spoken to people that are much older than that.
Yeah.
I was told about a lady that was 78 years old when she received an ADHD diagnosis.
Wow.
It's insane to think, that's a solid lifetime. That's a long innings to not know this thing about yourself. And of course it is subjective in terms of how your life has panned out. So I don't think it's as simple as saying the later you're diagnosed, the harder it is to deal with it all necessarily, because I think it's the support that you've got in place, it's your current circumstances. But if you think logically, like I said, there's years and years more of that internalized guilt, shame, ableism, the difficulties, being burnt out and trying to hide it. Like that really does a number on your nervous system. And when we're not machines, we can't carry that stuff on forever, and things do eventually start to give. We start to develop eating disorders, mental health disorders. That's when we start to kind of fall apart from the inside out because we're holding so much in and we don't have the tools to be able to do so.
There's more and more, to me at least, it feels there's more and more research coming out now around that impact on the nervous system and what that sort of controls in our lives. I know it sounds ridiculous. It's the central nervous system. It's pretty major, but a lot of these things are having a real damaging impact on that. And then those things, I guess, trigger things like fear, anxiety, confusion, all these things, all stemming from the nervous system. So it's all linked. And so when you talk about feelings like shame, that's a difficult thing to sort of like dig into, because the causes of shame could be myriad for so many people. From your perspective, what were the drivers of that shame? Was it the sort of realizing that you had felt different and maybe hadn't done anything about it, or felt powerless to do something about it? Was it, I don't know, instances that you saw bits of behavior that people had misread? I try and help us understand where that range of emotion really comes from, what it feels like.
Yeah. It's very difficult to put a pin on when it begins, but I remember being very young and having this constant awareness that there was something different about me, and people did pick up on it. It's I know we can be a bit airy-fairy and say things like the vibes were off, but like you got that sense even as a young child that there's something different about me, and people find me a little bit odd or a bit strange, and they maybe don't want to be around me as much. And for me, I was very different to my two older brothers. They were more kind of manually inclined, so they've both gone on to do trades like my dad did. I was a bit more of a bookworm. I'd prefer to be outside drawing and reading really late at night, all of this kind of stuff. But then because I wasn't able to do the things they did in the same way, that was something I really internalized because, well, I should be able to do that, shouldn't I? That's what's expected of me. But I'm finding it really difficult, and I'm more sensitive than they are as well. And that doesn't seem acceptable, which as a man, we do get taught that there's not really many emotions that you're allowed to show. It's either happiness or you're working hard and you're quiet, but anything outside of that, you got to keep it hidden and numb it. So it's something that begins so early, and it really shapes how you see yourself. And I think that's what so much of the weight was for me when I did get diagnosed, is realizing how much I unconsciously abandoned myself throughout the course of my life to feel less ashamed. So I would listen to music that other people did, even if it wasn't on my radar, but maybe that'll help me fit in, and I'll try to talk to them about this because that seems to be a popular topic, and I'll behave in this way because people are more accepting of me when I do that, and I'll speak like this. And it's realizing that so much of what I thought was my personality was actually me just appeasing people so that I felt a little bit less alone. And you don't realize until you do start going on this diagnosis journey that you've really quietly been ashamed of yourself your entire life. So there's not been that sense of loving yourself and developing any sense of self-esteem or thinking you're capable, like I did very well in school and still felt stupid. Even though I was known as, in a humorous way, the smart one in my family, I still thought I was stupid because he's left-handed, he can't use a screwdriver properly. So you really couldn't get away from it. There was always something that I should be able to do this better. I should be finding X, Y, and Z easier. I should be at this point in my life by now, and I'm not. And that was a real driving force for me the entire time. And that's something I'm still working on even now. You know, we're coming up on a good 3 years post-diagnosis, and I'm still learning things about myself and unpicking these really unconscious patterns that I've had as part of my daily life for as long as I know. But it is making way for something beautiful and healed and happy and healthy, and that's it's a worthy trade-off. You know, I'm happy to have gone through those incredibly low points post-diagnosis because I think I was making space for how my life is now and the role that I'm playing in my own life now. You know, I'm not allowing the world to dictate it now because it's my life. And I'm the one that has to live it. I'm the one that's in my head all day, every day. So I need to make it a good place to live.
Well, listen, matey, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's a fantastic insight into what it really, really feels like. You can't help but to listen to your story. And again, this is it's a conflicted emotion. I feel quite sad about somebody going through that. And we've got people at work going through this sort of stuff every day unknown. But in this case, we're talking about getting a late diagnosis and seeing it. And so not trying to leapfrog over the process, but this thing that you mentioned before about post-diagnosis, and like you've just explained, all this learnt behavior must be incredibly difficult to then drop.
Yeah.
So you've still got this masking behavior that's been going on, maybe intentionally but unfounded previously, as in, I don't know why I feel different. I just do, but I now got to fit in. So I'm masking to a point when you go, oh, okay, so that's what's been going on. Okay, right. So now I can be me, but you've learned a different you. What's the process like of, I guess, trying to unpick all that learnt behavior and for the first time, perhaps in goodness knows how long, feeling like you can be yourself?
Well, this was the most difficult part of it because people encourage you to unmask, you know, be authentic, be yourself, you know, express the real you. I didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was actually, as opposed to thinking, how do I now present this new version of me to the world? It's, how do I figure out who the real me actually is? You know, how do I start to figure out what it is that I want from life, what it is that I like to do, what it is that I don't like to do? How do the people in my life actually impact me? And is that something I've just been putting up with because I felt like I had to? Is the people I want to engage more with that I maybe wasn't letting myself before? So really for me, it was more about going inward and getting to know myself underneath all of that masking, that armor, that self-protection. And it was realizing, okay, so I've always been different. People found that difficult, doesn't mean I was. Where can I really start off now? And for me, that was seemingly simple stuff that's actually made a huge difference. It was, okay, well, I've realized I really don't like being in a busy workplace in person. So I've been working from home recently. So that's something that I really want to keep in my life. And then obviously working at Neurobridge, I'm fully remote, and that's brilliant for me. And then it was, I'm always fidgeting with things, and because people would tell me off for messing with pens and such, instead I would be scratching my skin, I'd be twirling the beard hair and kind of making a mess of myself, you know, because I was just so irritable. So now it's, I'm going to bring a fidget toy with me if I go anywhere, and I get quite overwhelmed in noisy spaces, so I'll start wearing some earplugs when I go out and just turn the noise down a little bit. And it wasn't so much about how I can present in the world. It was how can I make myself feel more comfortable in it. And then as I start exploring that and figuring out where I want to go, I can do it from a place where I feel a bit more secure in myself and I'm looking after myself before thinking about the rest of the world and the people in it. Not in a selfish way, but in a way where I want to feel good when I'm out and I want to feel good about what I'm doing. So in order to do that, I need to start thinking of my own needs for once.
Mm. Is there a sense of relief and empowerment that comes on the back of this stuff now? So you feel like you are beginning to be able to sort of drop that learnt mask and fully start to be you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really what the last few years have been about. It's been creating who I am now, coming back to who I was, like I was saying before, and it was making space for myself in my own life. So there is an immense sense of relief that I've gotten to that point, relief for the people that have helped me to do so, and a lot of gratitude that I actually had the opportunity to do so, because if I hadn't had that diagnosis, I was in a very, very bad spot mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and it really did save my life. You know, I was on an absolute crash course. I did not see any light in that tunnel. And it changed all of that. So there's an immense sense of gratitude with it. And I still have my moments where I look back and think, oh God, I wish that hadn't happened. Or why couldn't they just do this for me? And, you know, you do have to make peace with the past and forgive yourself, forgive other people. It doesn't mean you have to forget. That doesn't mean you have to rekindle relationships with people that are continually harming you. But anger serves a purpose when you let yourself feel it and then let yourself move past it. And there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of sadness, and in some ways, depression. You know, I hit a real low point afterwards, and that was necessary so that I could really sit with all of these feelings I'd never been allowed to express. And I made space to be able to do that. And that did, I think, pave the way and kind of open the gate for me to walk through and actually start carving that new path. And it's been an amazing thing overall.
Which is fantastic. And now you're in the sort of inside, trying to help out, right?
Yeah.
In the work that you're doing at Neurobridge. So I think, you know, just take our conversation today. I'm hoping goes such a long way for people helping to understand just one example about what could and it is going on in between the ears of some people at work. But in the work that you're doing, how are you trying to, I guess, help two audiences really? Because there are the neurodivergent individuals themselves going through the journeys that you've beautifully described today. But there's also the kind of work colleagues, and in my head, because of the focus of this podcast, particularly the kind of managers and leaders of people who maybe are dealing with shame and regret, thinking of how they've ended up managing or treating somebody that they now know has a diagnosis, and they've got to mend that relationship. They've got to readdress how they've managed that person. How's that whole support piece working, Chris? What are some of the I don't know, some of the conversations, some of the tools, some of the training that you're seeing have real effect out there now to sort of help both parties, I guess, get to grips with some of this stuff?
So the way that we've gone about it is we've created the world's first NIS. So that's a neuro-inclusion support system, which is a tech platform. It's called Neurobridge. And that essentially acts as a centralized neurodiversity support hub that an organization gains access to. The biggest barrier to people receiving support at work is that a lot of organizations say you have to have received a formal diagnosis and you have to have disclosed so that it's all on the books and we know we're being legally compliant, X, Y, Z. On the NHS, an ADHD diagnosis can take up to 10 years.
I was going to say that the pathway for my own kids has been long, and we went early, right?
It's insane.
But it's madness, absolute madness.
And then also only 1 in 4 people actually feel psychologically safe enough to disclose at work because there's been a lot of negative prior experiences. They see negative stereotyping and discrimination and bias and
well, they say it's an
also
excuse.
Yeah, exactly.
People, I've heard it. You're just making excuses for
Yep.
bad behavior. Like, come
Yeah,
on, we're not still
exactly.
living there, surely.
So the reason we've set our system up in the way that we have is that it does not matter if you are formally diagnosed or not. It doesn't matter if you're just there to start exploring your own mind or trying to understand your niece or nephew that's just received a diagnosis. It's open access so that there isn't that barrier to actually receiving the support that you need. And we've taken a really encompassing approach to that support. So within our system, there is learning spaces about a ton of different neurotypes. There's manager focused training. There's universal education about the way that the mind works and the importance of health and well-being. And there's a HR space, a recruitment space, an acquisition space. We've really taken an encompassing approach because the way we see it, it needs to cover the boardroom to the break room for this to really work.
Mm,
Because
mm,
neurodiversity is essentially the foundation of humans. You know, it is the only form of diversity that doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter how old you are, what your sexual orientation is, where you were born. We are a neurodiverse species. No two minds are alike. So it needs to have that encompassing approach because it isn't just about the 20% that do have significant differences. This is about all of us. And that's where we need to be going with this. You know, it needs to become the norm because it always has been. And just because we've spent the last couple of 100 years trying to silo people with rigid schedules and this much annual leave and this is how you do this and you've got to follow XYZ processes, it's not working for a lot of people.
yeah.
And when we do start getting it right, everybody benefits from it. You know, from the fact that people become more productive, all the way through to the fact that they feel happier at work, they become more loyal, they start to grow, they start to thrive. And myself, our CEO, both late diagnosed neurodivergent people, were prime examples of what happens when people allow themselves to do things in the way they need to do.
Mm.
Because you're facing less resistance, there's no friction in your life. And of course, that's not a simple A to B thing. There's a lot of learning to be done. There's hills that we need to climb together. We do need to help some people get on board and really understand this from a new perspective. But as I said before, we are really getting there and things are really changing. And even if some organisations are mainly getting involved at the time being because of legal implications, at least it means they're starting to take those steps and they're getting going. And any step that we can start taking is a good one. And
Yeah.
they all add up.
I think it is taking the first sort of steps, right? And making an effort and listening and trying to move forward. If you were, I mean, again, it seems if in my head it feels like a daft question because of the range that people experience. But let's put ourselves in a situation of a manager of a team, and one of the team members has had a late diagnosis, and you know they're an established person in that team, and there's work to be done now to sort of reestablish relationships and working practices. In terms of sort of first steps, if you think about the tools and support that you're advocating for, what should sort of things should people be thinking about? What sort of approaches do you see really working in the workplace?
I suppose the best way to answer that is to say what doesn't tend to work first.
Okay.
Because what happens a lot of the time is that a person receives a diagnosis and then they mention it at work if they feel comfortable doing so. They say they might need some support, and then they're expected to have all the answers.
Yes.
But much like myself, you've spent your entire life just molding yourself to the way everyone else wants you to do things. You got to a point where it wasn't working. You started exploring, you looked into the diagnosis, and then you find this thing out. That's only the start of that journey. As I said before, it's the tip of the iceberg. So a lot of people don't know what support they need because they've never allowed themselves to ask that question. They've never felt like they had the space to ask that question. How can I be helped? How can you help me? We've never known a life like that. So really, it's getting to grips with the ways in which people are struggling. You know, it's being really curious about what they're finding difficult, not as a person that's received a diagnosis, just as another human being. You know, I find it really difficult working in the office because there's a lot of foot traffic. Okay, well, maybe we can look into things like remote working options. Maybe we can try design a bit of a quieter workspace that's intentionally low traffic. And it isn't rocket science. You know, it takes a bit of time. And yes, there is some science behind it that some people may need to know. But on the surface, we all have our own individual ways of doing things at our best. We all have individual strengths, challenges, and support needs.
Mm.
And it really is about meeting people where they're at and just being compassionate about it. And instead of thinking they're making excuses, like you said before, they're not. They need help. And there's very simple, easy ways to do that.
I think this, what a surprise. It all comes back to utilizing and developing those human skills we talk about
Mm-hmm.
a lot on this podcast, not
Mm-hmm.
taking them for granted. I think the most fascinating thing that you just sort of said for me personally is the clear, obvious statement that we perhaps just miss over is that they're not. You're gonna say, well, what do you need from me now? You got your diagnosis. How do I know? I've got
Yeah.
no idea what I need at that point. I'm just figuring it out myself. What I would
Yeah.
like you to do maybe is just talk to me and listen to me and maybe help me think things through
Yeah.
and see you can help me just as much by observing what you see change when
Mm-hmm.
things happen. I think that's just a fascinating. That's a whole blinking another episode to get into in all of that, because you can just take it for granted that you've got a piece of paper, you've now got all the
Mm-hmm.
answers. Give me the roadmap to helping you out, and it's like, mate, it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating.
Yeah, people just aren't in that position, and like you said, they don't know what it is that they need. They don't really feel like they know themselves at that point.
Yeah,
So how are they going to know what they need? All they know is that they're struggling, they're worried, they're stressed, they're overwhelmed, probably burnt out in a lot of ways. They're navigating huge roller coaster rides of emotions, and that isn't something that they're going to be able to give a straight answer for in a lot of cases. So it really is about collaborating and,
yeah,
and starting small, thinking what's one small change we could make to make it a bit easier, and we'll go from there.
yeah. I mean, it sounds so obvious when you say it, Chris, but I'm sure I'm not the only idiot in the room who just doesn't necessarily initially think of these things. But I think that's been hugely insightful. I feel like a bit of a wally, to be honest, because I'm going to try and summarize this show with the sticky notes part of the show. And I'm like, well, where do we go here? How do we summarize what we've talked about today? That's madness. But we'll have a go. If you were to give people 3 really simple bits of advice
Mm,
on maybe getting into that supporting somebody who's got a late neurodivergent diagnosis,
mm.
if you were to pick out 3 actions that you think would be really helpful, what would you say they would be?
Say the first one is to start conversations with the team. Not necessarily an individual if they happen to have disclosed, but just start to normalize this subject. Start talking about the ways in which we all work differently. What's working for you all in the meeting, what's not. Maybe that's something that you do through an anonymous survey, but just start getting conversations going, give people a platform to actually air their thoughts, feelings, and opinions, and approach that with curiosity, compassion. It's not about problem solving, it's about helping people to feel at their best. So approach it in that way. And then I would say try to identify just one small change you could make to the workplace that is going to help reduce some common barriers. Whether that's a bit of an environmental adaptation or it's just a small tweak to make something a little bit more flexible so people can have some more autonomy in the way that they do
Mm,
things, just a small change to get them going. And then one that's a bit of a wider scale would be to actually start actively challenging when you see discrimination, bias, negative stereotyping, saying people, oh, I'm so OCD. Just because you like a tidy desk, it does not equate to the challenges people face, And I think that's something that managers especially can have a really positive impact with, the way they approach their team, their workplace, the people within it, the way that they lead themselves and communicate and behave. That really does have a trickle-down effect. And I think that can massively transform the culture that people are operating within. So when their manager is willing to ask questions, willing to learn, and also willing to stand up for people that have been marginalised for a long time, that massively changes the tide for all of this.
yeah, that allyship's really, really important, mate, for
Mm.
sure. Chris, before I let you go, where can people find out a bit more about you and Neurobridge? Where should they head for? What should they look for?
So I'd get people to go straight to neurobridge.co.uk. You'll be able to find links to everything else there, but just as a one-stop shop, if you head to their website, you'll learn a lot about why we do what we do and how we actually go about doing it as well. And there's a ton of free resources you can download on there as well, just to start some of those conversations and help you in actually getting the wheels turning a little bit.
And it's for both audiences, right? It's for people going through or having a
Everyone.
diagnosis, or people dealing with people who have had a diagnosis, right?
That's it.
At work.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Chris, I was really looking forward to talking to you, but I can't thank you enough for sharing what has been an incredibly personal and emotional episode, sharing your journey. It's given me personally some huge insight that I had perhaps not thought about. I only hope it does a fraction of the same for anybody listening. You're an absolute superstar, mate. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's been a real pleasure coming on, and the way I see it, I unmasked by becoming authentic, and I don't feel ashamed of that journey anymore, and I'm making peace with that. And if it means that people feel inspired to do the same and they start being a little bit kinder to themselves, then it's worth it.
Cracking. What a great way to finish. Thanks a lot, mate. You take care.
All right, enjoy the rest of your day, Andy. I'll see you soon.
Okay, everybody, that was Chris Hood from Neurobridge. And if you'd like to find out a bit more about him or any of the topics we've talked about today, please check out the show notes. So, that concludes today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, found it interesting, and heard something maybe that will help you become a stickier, more successful business from the inside going forwards. If you have, please like, comment and subscribe. It really helps. I'm Andy Gorham, and you've been listening to the Sticky from the Inside podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.